We are very grateful that you are all here to join us today and discuss how we all work together to support international students at Rutgers. We view this workshop as an opportunity to connect with our campus partners, both those who are coming as a repeat attendee and those who are here with us for the first time. So we hope to welcome today faculty and administrators from across the university and each take the time to learn from each other about all of our roles in supporting international students. So as you may know, we offer this workshop once every semester, and it's really a way to underscore our support and our commitment to student retention, as well as positive outcomes for international students. As I said, some of you are repeat attendees, so thanks again for your ongoing collaboration. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we extend a special welcome, and we look forward to introducing you to our office and getting to know about our services. My name is Maya Sarno. I'm the Associate Director for International Student Support at Rutgers Global International Student Services. We're also known as ISSS. With me today is one of our senior international student advisors, Carissa.
Morning, everyone.
And you're also going to get to meet many more of our ISS staff when they join the second half of the workshop later this morning. For the administrators and student services staff joining us today, we are aware that working with international students involves different roles, and there are many cases and situations in which you all play a part. Throughout the morning, we'll clarify some of the regulations as well as requests that you receive from international students. We'll go into greater detail about electronic requests that are submitted by international students that may pass through your offices. We'll also talk about employment authorization because we know that affects a lot of you and your work as well. And we'll talk about how you each play a key role in the international students' journey at Rutgers. And so before we get started, I just want to go over a few housekeeping notes with today's Zoom. One is we have a mixed group here today of deans, program directors, administrators, and student support staff. In the first half of the workshop, we'll go over a lot of general points about students' needs and our office. We'll have a short break around 10:30. Then we'll start the second half of the workshop, which will consist mostly of breakout rooms with our advising staff. And that will be a great chance to dig deeper and to discuss some of the lingering cases, also share some best practices, and open the floor to any lingering questions that you may have for us at that point. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to use the chat box or write them down. We'll be sure to address them later in the workshop. We hope to have time for Q&A at the end of part 1, as well as going into more in-depth questions in part 2. After the presentation today, we'll send out some electronic evaluations, and we thank you very much in advance for taking the time, not only to be with us today, but also to offer your honest feedback afterwards about this workshop. We really do value your input, and it really does help us as we improve the workshop and consider other ways to engage our campus partners moving forward. Oh, and also in case you're wondering, we will provide you with the PDF of the slides afterwards. So here are some main points that we're going to go over today. We're going to discuss the unique needs of international students, and we'll also go over some introductory concepts and terminology that are related to international students and their F1 and J1 status. We'll also provide some background and context in terms of regulatory compliance and how these things can affect you in your work with international students. We'll go over reporting requirements, maintaining legal status for international students, and how we all work together to make sure that our students are following the regulations and the law pertaining to their legal status. Along with providing some updates from our office, we'll also discuss departmental roles and expectations in assisting our international population, and we'll go over some best practices that you all may have for collaboratively supporting our students. So before we go into detail about our particular office, ISSS, I want to briefly let you know about the other units within Rutgers Global, especially maybe if you're new to Rutgers or new to our office. So the ISSS is our office, and we work directly with international students and scholars. Our office is pictured below. We're located at 180 College Avenue, and you're welcome to visit our office Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, or Friday. We are closed to walk-ins on Wednesdays. Rutgers Global also has study abroad, which sends students from the US to study outside of the US. We have the China office. The China office oversees our engagements with China, as well as the Rutgers Overseas Semester Experience, which is also known as ROSE. The ROSE program was actually developed in response to the COVID pandemic back in spring 2020, and it offers Chinese students the opportunity to experience their first or second semester of Rutgers at a partner university campus in China. 3 locations with the Chinese partner universities are in Beijing, Guangzhou, and Shanghai. The first semester of the program was in fall 2020, and actually spring 2022, our current semester, will be its final semester, as we expect an even more robust return to on-campus classes in the fall. So this is the last semester for the ROSE program. Then we have the International Academic Success Office. They help coordinate what's called the Are You Fit program, and that's a program to support new undergraduate international students, and also coordinates other academic support initiatives for international students. The Programs Unit helps support university-wide cultural and academic programs for students, faculty, and staff across the university. Our International Partnership Office develops agreements and builds relationships with universities worldwide and coordinates visits from international delegations. Specifically, we currently have staff in the Partnership Office working on initiatives in China and in Latin America. So more information about any of these Rutgers Global units can be found at global.rutgers.edu. Here's a snapshot of our current organizational structure. ISSS is roughly divided into student services and faculty and scholar services. Mohini Mukherjee leads our team of student services staff members, and our director for scholar services, Asanath Dande, has a group of faculty and scholar services staff. In addition, we also have some central administration staff taking care of our front office, compliance, and health insurance as well for all our international students and scholars. So we merged with the RBHS International Office in 2015. So we actually have some staff in our RBHS Newark office over in Newark. And our office has grown a lot in the past few years. As you see, we have a lot of folks at Student Services. So those of you who have worked with us for a while know that our scholars team moved to 30 College Ave, and the Student Services team remains at 180 College Ave. I'd also like to point out that in addition to our degree-seeking student advisors and our student services side, we also have a specialty advisor, and that's Carissa. Carissa takes care of our non-degree short-term students as well as student interns. So she's the one who's able to help you if you're looking to bring in a student to campus who wants to come to campus but isn't looking to actually pursue a degree at Rutgers. Carissa is the sponsored student advisor who works with Fulbright students and scholars after their arrival to campus. Greg Costalis, who also works in the programs unit of Rutgers Global, helps to support these sponsored students before their arrival to campus. He helps them with their initial applications materials. Okay, so now I'd like to further introduce you to our office and what it is that we do with international students. So the core role of our office is to provide immigration advice to our F1 and J1 international students. We assist students in maintaining their legal status, and we'll go over what that means in just a little while. And we help them comply and follow federal regulations to help keep not only them, but keep the institution approved for hosting international students. In terms of student advising, we host virtual appointments daily, except for Wednesdays, which, as I said, is our day that we're closed for processing. And we have in-person advising by appointment only. We also advise through our virtual off-campus employment chat sessions. We do remote quick question advising, which we call QQA for students. And our front desk staff is available to help answer quick questions over the phone. And finally, all of our workshops have been moved online, so students can actually review the workshops at their own pace on Canvas and go back through them on their own time. We view and pride ourselves as a holistic international services office. So in addition to advising, we also provide programming for international students and scholars. We have our mandatory international student orientation program, which was moved to a virtual setting in 2020 and 2021. And we also conducted a hybrid orientation in 2021 of the fall. And then we had to move back to virtual for spring 2022. So in January, we had a virtual orientation. However, regardless of the format, whether it's been hybrid or virtual or all in person, our orientation program typically receives really strong reviews from the students. It is mandatory for all new international students. And then also our global programs unit does help with the orientation program. And they also create various in-person and virtual programming throughout the year. Our advisors also serve as liaisons for our departments. So you may be aware that academic departments have certain liaisons within our office. So they are the main points of contact for each department. So you can take a look at the liaison list, which we have posted on our website, to see who the liaison for your academic department is. Finally, our office is committed to providing clear communication. All right, they always say communication is key. So we try to communicate very clearly to both our staff and our campus constituents, as well as our students. International students have many deadlines and rules, and so we try to help keep those deadlines and rules on their radars, and we do this through automated emails, website updates, monthly notices, and more, including social media as well. We also try to keep you, our campus partners, informed of any major policy updates that affect international students and could also affect your work with international students. We know Rutgers is a big place, and so by doing workshops such as this, we're aiming to help keep our staff informed, and we try to help our students navigate and identify all the resources that they need to succeed. Of course, we know that we're not the only office that helps support international students, right? It takes a village, and so our work cannot be completed without the collaboration of all of our campus partners, which includes all of you. So while we do provide immigration advising and programs, we also recognize that we can't be all things to international students. We absolutely need the cashier's office to help with handling student accounting issues and the academic departments to advise on course requirements. We also refer students to the Dean of Students office or CAPS whenever needed, and as well as many other offices. Because of this, we're making concerted efforts to build relationships and work together with all units across campus, whether they be academic or non-academic, to help with the international student experience, to help provide a positive, seamless experience for our students. So here's a snapshot of our international student statistics for the current spring semester. So as you can see, we experienced a steady increase over the last several years, and then there's a decline in 2020, 2021, right? No accident, no coincidence with the pandemic. So specifically, undergrad enrollment has gone down about 30% since 2019. And while there's also been a little dip in graduate enrollment, and some programs have been slow to grow, all this is consistent with national trends. So even though these are turbulent times, we are confident that Rutgers is continuing to ensure that our international student population knows that they're welcome here. And we're doing our best to help them have the most positive experience possible. I know that many of you have also been very actively involved in making accommodations for international students, especially over the last few years during these very challenging times. And our collaborative efforts to support them is so important for retention. It's so important for future enrollment. So we really, really do earnestly appreciate everyone's efforts to help with that. At ISSS, we've been continuing to support students both near and far throughout the pandemic. And we take pride in the many ways that we've been able to connect our students and serve their needs. If you're interested in following the data about international student enrollment, you'll be interested in knowing that we will soon feature a data dashboard on our website, and that will allow us to share stats and numbers in a more public format. So more to come on that. So here's a very brief overview of a typical international student journey. So like all students, students first apply to Rutgers. Once they're admitted, they're issued what's called a DS 2019 or an I-20 document from admissions. A DS 2019 or I-20 are immigration documents that we'll describe in further detail in just a bit, and we'll show you what they look like. The student then takes that document along with some other documents and materials to a US embassy or consulate for the visa application and appointment. Then once the student arrives to the US, students have to maintain what's called their legal status. And we'll talk shortly about what's involved in maintaining their legal status. It's a big part of what we do. It's a big part of what students are required to do as international students. Many times during their journey, they will wish to participate in on or off-campus employment. And at the end of their degrees, students have the options of applying for OPT, which is optional practical training. We'll talk about that in a little while. They also have options to transfer to a different school or maybe to a different program, maybe from undergrad to graduate within Rutgers, or they have the option to return home. And again, we'll talk more about these post-graduation options in a little while. For now, though, I'm going to pass the mic back to Carissa, who's going to start her part by explaining and describing who exactly our international students are.
Thank you, Maya. So let's talk about the term international student and what it means, and really that there are different visa types for international students. So the term international student may be pretty straightforward. It's really a foreign national studying in the United States. And while that's true, our office specifically advises international students in J1 or F1 status, as Maya mentioned. Some of our students may identify themselves as international students, but they may actually be US citizen, permanent resident, maybe in other less common statuses, like as a spouse or a child, someone that's of someone that's working on a visa, as an example. However, the majority of our students that identify as international are in F1 and J1 status. And most of our international students here are in F1 status. So the purpose and intention of an individual who enters in the United States in F1 status is full-time study. You may have heard of the Form I-20, which we just mentioned. This is also known as a certificate of eligibility and is generated for the international student after they're admitted to the university. So in general, initial I-20s are issued by our admissions office, as we mentioned. But if there's any changes that would need to happen on this document, it's generally made by our office after. And the benefit of the F1 status is that international students do have the ability to work on campus, and we'll talk about that later. There's very specific circumstances in which they can work off campus, and that's known as either curricular practical training, known as CPT, or optional practical training, known as OPT. And we'll get into that in more detail. I'm sure many of you have questions about that. There's also the J1 status. So individuals who enter the US in J1 status are also known as exchange visitors. And the J1 differs from the F1 because they're in J1 has various categories within the exchange visitor J1 visa. So although those of you have maybe worked with the scholars at Rutgers, you may have known that there's various categories within the J1, and the J1 DS 2019 is also the certificate of eligibility. And our J1 students are subject to some slightly different regulations compared to the F1 students. So specifically, what that can happen, and you can see that when they work on and off campus, and we'll again get into that in more detail. But there's also short-term non-degree J1 students, and that's where I usually come into play. So you may be wondering what the difference between F1 and J1 students are, and mostly that's determined by the source of their funding. So F1 students are generally self-funded and funded with their family or support, or in some cases funded by Rutgers. And J1 students are different because most of their funding is generally coming from a third party, so such as Fulbright or a government, a home scholarship, government scholarship of some sort. So that is the main difference. Okay, we can move on. The I-20 and DS 2019 are generated from what's called the SEVIS database. And we just want to briefly explain to you what SEVIS is. So as you can see, SEVIS stands for Student Exchange Visitor Information System. And it's a database owned by the US government, and it's maintained by Rutgers, and specifically our office. So because we have so many student records to maintain, we also have an in-house database known as Synapsis, and some of you actually may have had interactions with Synapsis, and that helps keep track all of our records. And the information that's transferred from, there's a records data warehouse that goes into Synapsis, and then we send that information to SEVIS for reporting purposes. So it's important to have everything correct. And as you can imagine, we need cooperation with the student to make sure everything is accurate. So there are some items that we do have to report to SEVIS, and they're listed here. So the program information, the address, the phone number, their email, and the updates through, they get that information, and that's sent through the My Records portal. So their personal information, any employment information, dependent information, and if they're less than full-time. So all those things are very crucial in terms of updating their SEVIS record. So as I mentioned earlier, the I-20 and DS-2019 are certificate of eligibility forms for the F1 and J1 students. And they receive this document after they've been admitted and after they've shown proof of their funding. The document has their personal information, program information, including the level of their study and the specific program that the student's going to pursue. More importantly, there's a start date and an end date on these documents, and the document should not be expired while they're in their program here at Rutgers. So what's also important to note is that I-20 and DS-2019 are generated from that same SEVIS database. So let's talk about visa versus status. You've heard me say F1 and J1 status, but you may know that the visa itself is an entry stamp in their passport, and that allows the student to enter legally into the US. So in terms of status, a visa and status they are related, they go hand in hand, but they're not the same thing. So it's true that an F1 student would need to enter the country on an F1 visa, which is that foil in their passport, and that is granted by the consulate or embassy overseas, and that allows the student to enter the US. The visa is like the key that allows the holder to enter the US, which is the house, okay? And the visa holder can enter the house as long as the visa is valid and not expired, but the status is dictated by their I-20. So once they've entered the US with that key, then their status begins, and they must maintain their legal status, which includes making sure their I-20 and DS-2019 do not expire when they're in their program. Okay, so here's an example of a visa stamp, and you can see the visa type indicated in the red circle is on the right-hand side of the visa. So our friend, Mr. Harry Potter, was issued an F1 visa. And inside the yellow box, you can see that the visa has the expiration date. So the main point to remember is that Harry needed this to enter the US while the visa was still valid. And if the visa expires while he's inside the US, there's not a problem. As long as he continues to maintain his legal status as an F1 student, and as long as his I-20 does not expire while he's in his program. Once the visa is expired, Harry can only renew his visa at the US consulate or embassy outside the US. It is important to also note that just because someone was issued a visa does not mean that they're guaranteed to be permitted inside the US. You may be aware that students need to meet with the port of entry officers, and they will be able to ask them some questions and make sure that it's actually at their discretion to say if the student's permissible to enter the US or not. Okay, next, the I-94. So in relation to the concepts of visa stamps and legal status, you may have also heard of an I-94. And an I-94 is an entry and departure record. It's issued by the Customs and Border Protection, known as CBP, and it states as long as the visa holder, it states that the visa holder may stay in the US, and it proves that they've entered the country legally. So on this example, the F1 student's I-94 record, you can see that the F1 status is noted on the under the class of admission, and the admitted date until is DS. That might seem a little strange because it's not an actual date, but the D/S means duration of status. So an F1 students and J1 students are the only visa type really that gets this annotated on their I-94. And it basically confirms that the students can remain in the US for the duration of their status as long as they're maintaining their legal status. So that is important to note. Okay, some government offices. We will just briefly go over and explain a little bit how we work with the array of government offices that are responsible for the programs and help our international students maintain their legal status. So while we work closely with campus partners, our office is also unique because we work closely with these government offices that help then publish the updates and the regulatory information, and then help the students comply and communicate that these regulations and these changes to the students. So as you can imagine, interpreting and following government regulations can be complicated. And there are many regulations that end up changing frequently. So our job is never boring. But just to highlight some of them. So the Department of State operates outside the US, and that is an organization that helps our students, apply for the visas or F1 and J1 visa before they come to the US. The Department of State, the Department of Homeland Security takes care of everything inside the US. So when the students get off the plane and enter the US in the airport, or they cross a land border, they meet with the Customs and Border Patrol officers, that's CBP, and then Immigration and Customs and Enforcement, known as ICE, is the legal enforcement arm of the Department of Homeland Security. The SEVIS database is housed under ICE. And finally, the USCIS is known as the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services, and they are the benefit granting unit that provides the services for non-immigrants in the United States. So more locally, we work with the Social Security office, where students are eligible to apply for the Social Security, SSN, if they have a job offer, like if they're working on campus. And then students might need a denial letter, or they would possibly need documents to go to the New Jersey MVC when they're applying for the driver's license. So there's a lot of these offices that we work with, and it's tied also to their account and their SEVIS information. Okay, so International Student Orientation, also known as ISO, is a comprehensive week-long event that's mandatory for international students, and it's in the beginning of each semester, so fall and spring. We also include a lot of some legal sessions from our team, and there's some informal sessions as well from our campus partners, and of course, opportunities for the students to socialize. So this year, as it was similar to last year's, the entire orientation was delivered virtually, but we still managed to help with some in-person events, and we're slowly, hopefully, moving towards that direction. We have also had an amazing team of orientation leaders that help our students meet with the students and take part in the social activities and game nights and all of that. So there's been a very good good feedback about our orientation that's been virtual, but we also have some asynchronous material, and the students really, I think they appreciate all that we do. We've gotten some good feedback, and we've made a huge difference, we feel, in the students' adjustment when they come to campus, and we know that this makes a big difference. So I'm going to hand it back to Maya and to talk a little bit more about some challenges some students face.
Sure. Thanks, Carissa. So when we talk about some challenges that international students have, one of them, unfortunately, is scams and fraud. So new international students, especially the newly arrived ones, unfortunately, they are often targeted in fraudulent schemes. So while a lot of us get, text messages and emails that are obviously, scam attempts and fraudulent efforts and things like that, international students especially can be prey to such fraudulent efforts and schemes such as this. There are scammers who unfortunately pose as government officials that are, or maybe interested employers who are looking to hire international students. And they have many sophisticated methods of calling international students, maybe masking their phone numbers with a caller ID that looks like a legitimate office, such as ICE or the FBI or even the IRS. So these scammers oftentimes take advantage of unsuspecting international students by demanding money, frequently in the form of gift cards. And they tell students that if any failure to comply with their demands will result in deportation or other negative consequences. So you can imagine this is very upsetting when international students get these types of outreach, and they can be, prone to responding quickly, unfortunately. So we do our best to warn international students about such fraudulent schemes. We warn them through the email notices. We tell them about it during international student orientation. And the ISSS website also contains information about scams and fraud that students can refer to. So please, if you ever hear of or any international students who've been victims of a scam, please feel free to direct them to our office directly, and we will advise them about next steps for reporting the incident, as well as remind them about how they can protect themselves against such schemes going forward. So let's talk a little bit about maintaining legal status, because I know we refer to that a lot throughout the morning. So what does that mean to maintain legal status? So when students are here on a student visa, what it is that their main objective, as has been decided by the embassy and consulate when they give them the visa, the main objective is to study here and pursue a degree program, a specific program that they've been admitted to. So here's some guidance in terms of maintaining legal status. The student must first check in with our office upon arrival to the US by completing the check-in form on the Our Global portal. So "Are you here?" is not enough. They have to actually go through check-in with our office so we know that they're here and doing what they need to do from a legal perspective. The student must also be pursuing a full course of study, and we'll talk about what that means for both undergraduate and graduate students in a little while. Their passport must be valid, and they must maintain and update their address, email, and phone number through the My Rutgers portal. As mentioned before, the DS 2019 and I-20 cannot expire while they're still enrolled in their academic programs. Also, any changes in terms of degree level or program of study, like if they change their major, that's something that we need to update through the government database, through SEVIS. Also, students must have health insurance coverage at all times. They should also obtain travel signatures if they decide to do any international travel. So maintaining their status is very, very, very important. It's our responsibility to educate students about what that means, but it's ultimately the student's responsibility to maintain their legal status. So what is a full course of study anyway? So from an international student perspective, okay, a full course of study means 12 credits for undergraduates and 9 credits for graduate students. F1 students are only allowed to enroll in one online course, which is 3 credits per semester toward their full-time enrollment requirement. However, there's current guidance from ICE due to COVID that provides exceptions to the rules for online courses. However, that guidance is set to expire at the end of the spring 2022 semester. So while we may have students now who are enrolled in more than one online course, it's okay now, it may not be okay after June. So we're communicating with students about that as well. Anyway, also, if it is their last semester of their program and only one course is required, the course has to be in person. The last course may not be an online or remote or distance learning course. Hybrid courses are acceptable for international students, and students must always be making normal progress toward the completion of their degree. Let's talk about an RCL. You might hear about RCLs a lot. These are specific exceptions to a full course of study, right? It's a reduced credit load or reduced course load. If a student meets one of these distinct exceptions, they can apply for a reduced course load. They must submit a request on the Our Global portal And we'll talk about what that looks like. We'll show some screenshots of what that looks like, but they have to submit a request for the RCL for review first. And before our office receives the request from the student, the request has to be reviewed and approved first by either an academic dean or graduate program director, or for RBHS by the registrar's office. So some of you may get some of those RCLE forms come across your inbox. But these on the right side of the screen, you'll see, are the very distinct reasons for possible RCL. So a student's record has to be updated if there's any changes from the current information listed. For instance, if a student changes degree levels or if they need an extension of their I-20, we have to update their record in SEVIS. We have to report that information to the government. Some forms that are listed here need academic approval. So you may, again, see some of these e-forms come across your inbox for you to approve before it then gets passed on to us for our advisors to approve. So the forms listed on this slide, the ones that are bold, are just a few of the forms that may need academic approval. So this allows our office to obtain accurate information directly from the school about what the student is eligible to be doing, whether it be changing their program, changing their degree level, taking a leave of absence, and then it helps update the student's specific application before it comes to our office, and then we approve it and report their change up to SEVIS. Okay, and now I'm going to pass it back to Carissa, who's going to talk about the big topic of employment.
Sure. So should we pause here or maybe just mention, again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I see one now. We can probably take it now or later. What do you think?
We could take this. This is actually a big and really important question. So I say let's just take this one live right now. So Jasenia, thank you for asking a question, Jasenia. The question is, what happens if a student takes a leave of absence or a semester withdrawal? Do they need to leave the country? The answer is yes, they do. Okay. The only exception to that is if they're on a medical reduced course load. If they're on a medical reduced course load, that could be because they're taking some sort of medical treatment here in the US. They can stay in the US if they're on a medical RCL. Undergrad would have to retain some sort of enrollment, 1 credit or something to maintain that enrollment as a Rutgers student to get Rutgers benefits. But sorry, the short answer to your question is yes. If a student takes a leave of absence or the withdrawal for a semester, they cannot be in the US because really the government expects a student to be here making normal academic progress. So taking a leave is not making normal academic progress. They're expected to leave the US. So, there's now a new, leave of absence process that I think has been streamlined from, the registrar's office so that we can try to catch more of these as they happen, because what we never want to happen is for a department to approve a student's leave of absence and the student hangs out here and they say, well, I never knew I had to leave. When the fact is, when we find out that they're taking a leave of absence, we definitely communicate with the student right away that they're expected not to be in the US at that point. And then they can come back when they're ready to restart their program. And then Matt is asking, what if the withdrawal is for 1 course out of 3 or 4, lowering them to part-time? So anytime a student goes below full-time, whether it be an undergrad student or a graduate student, if they dip below full-time, they have to have an authorized reduced course load. They have to have an RCL. They can't just withdraw and be below full-time. Carissa, did you want to add something to that? I think I might have cut you off.
I was going to say, sometimes I know that housing can come into play if they are a graduate student living on campus and then going to part-time. But generally speaking, I think if they've done the appropriate reduced credit and they've gotten the request, I think it should be okay. One thing I was going to say in terms of students taking a leave of absence is that, we do have some students that are placed on academic probation and maybe do leave the university for a little bit. But in many cases, they talk with our office and then say transfer out for a semester, or maybe they get their grades up and then come back in. So that could be an example of where they could have made arrangements so they did not have to leave the US, just as an exception. but they go maintain their status elsewhere and then maybe come back to Rutgers once they're able to register again. So we've also seen that. Okay, so we'll get to more questions, I think, as we move on, but and I'm sure this topic will bring about some more questions, which is employment. Mm-hmm. So as you can see on the slide, when it comes to international students, we think of employment, just to define it, because I think it is important. We think of employment as any service or activity normally performed in exchange for some type of compensation. And I think that's important to define for everyone, particularly for our students. So common examples of off-campus employment include internships or co-ops. We often get this question about whether volunteer work or a conference reimbursement should count as off-campus employment. And sometimes there are gray areas in the topics surrounding employment. So when in doubt, feel free to ask our office, an advisor at our office, or directly have a student contact our office, and we can advise them more appropriately. And it's important that, we will go over the basics of off-campus employment today. But as the subject is very broad, it's necessary to understand that there's a full workshop that students are required to attend, and that is on campus. If you have any additional questions, there will be space, of course, to ask more about the off-campus employment in the breakout rooms. But basically, the off-campus employment the on-campus employment, should be 20 hours a week per week, or it's part-time when students are enrolled in the fall or spring semesters. So I'm sorry, I want to make sure that we're going to talk specifically about on-campus. So on-campus work is restricted to 20 hours a week, and which is considered part-time. And then when they're enrolled in the spring and fall semesters. So we will talk additionally about off-campus later. Okay, so the answer is yes, they can work, but of course there's lots of regulations and rules that they have to follow. So there are some special considerations too with COVID. So let's first go over the types of employment that's open to international students. So international students, either in F1 or J1 status, are eligible for on-campus work as well as off-campus work. So, however, there are some restrictions. So let's first talk about on campus. And F1 students and J1 students, like I said, can work up to 20 hours a week. That's total. It could be multiple jobs, but all of their work may not exceed 20 hours during the semester. During official breaks, like winter break or summer break, and even spring break, they can work more than 20 hours a week. So F1 students are authorized to work on campus until they complete their program, while J1 students must go through additional authorization from their sponsor and with Rutgers as well. We do have some J1 students working on campus. So they need to get that authorization, and that authorization is dictated according to, it's a maximum of 12 months or when they're done with their program. So it's a little more specific, whichever happens first. So in the current climate, it's worth mentioning that students who are outside the country and do not have active SEVIS records cannot be paid for on-campus work at Rutgers. There's no formal guidance on funding and employment for continuing students, like if they're working as PTLs or in hourly work while they're overseas. But it's important to recognize that there could be international tax laws or labor laws as well as that can impact these decisions. If students have questions about on-campus employment while they're in F1 or J1 status, and outside the US, they're advised to talk with their employing unit and, of course, our office. So now for off-campus employment, F1 students who wish to work work off campus are required to request authorization for practical training. And practical training is employment authorization that allows a student to work off campus for the purpose of gaining experience and knowledge in their field of study. So curricular practical training, or CPT, can be granted as long as the employment opportunity is an integral part of the student's curriculum. CPT is authorized by our office, and there's no application fee as of now, but we do work with the student and with the academic department to review the request, and it's typically approved within a few business days. So on the other hand, optional practical training, known as OPT, requires a student to file an application with the USCIS. So that's the separate government office. And OPT is a benefit available for F1 students, and they can work actually anywhere within their field on that appropriate degree level. So there is an application fee for OPT, and it's currently $410. And students can apply for pre-completion or post-completion. And there's also a STEM OPT extension that they can apply for. So while international students are enrolled in their program, they may apply for pre-completion, although more often than not, we see CPT, because typically CPT is something that's required of their program, and that is, generally speaking, a faster application if they're eligible for CPT. Okay, after the students complete their academic programs, many of them work off campus for up to 12 months for the post-completion OPT. And if a student's eligible for STEM, if they're STEM eligible and they're in that STEM field, they may apply for an additional 24 months of employment after their OPT ends. So it's a separate application. And under the current guidance for the government, the student may continue to work in CPT while they're overseas, and OPT while they're overseas. However, if they're applying for OPT or the STEM extension, the current regulations require the students to be inside the US at the time of filing their application. So there's, again, workshops for the students online, and we encourage them to take these workshops at their own time to learn more about it. Sometimes there's quizzes at the end, which helps us determine that they've listened and they've, absorbed some of the information. They can also take it again. So if they need a refresher, it's pretty helpful for them to really, and also it gives us a knowledge of what they've learned, and we can see what they've scored on the test. So some of the workshops that they can take online are on-campus employment, off-campus employment, and post-completion OPT. Okay, do we have any questions we want to address yet? Or looks like you're answering them, I think, Maya, right? Okay, let's talk about academic training. Academic training is for J1 students, for them to work off campus, and it's similar to OPT for F1 students, but it's for J1 students, and it's the purpose of having them have experience and gaining knowledge within their field. So that is authorized within our office for a very specific job with the start and end date. And students may do academic training during their academic programs, or if they've graduated. So we do know that we have a small number of, J1 students, but it's important to note that the process of academic training is very different than OPT, and so are the timelines. So just to give you a glimpse of what, students and employers need to provide in their application, that's kind of what this slide is talking about. But these applications are evaluated within our office, and they do not have a separate application that goes to the USCIS. But unlike OPT, J1 students must have a job offer when they apply for academic training. So the timelines are different, and they're a little limited in terms of when they need to give us that job offer. So there's a lot of different intricacies with academic training and the J1 regulations. So it's always good to have your students reach out to our office. And I do work with a lot of the J1 students in particular. So if they have questions, feel free to direct them towards me. And all this to say is employment is very complicated at times when it comes to international students. So if you have further questions and specific circumstances, we can certainly talk about that in the breakout room. So I look forward to hearing your questions about that. Okay. So onboarding an F1 or J1 student. So this is a general overview of the onboarding process and what documents you will need to collect from a student if you're entering them into HCM or the payroll system. So I know some departments and units, there's specific staff that handle that in the onboarding process, while other departments may need help with the HR office. But this progression looks very easy on the slide, and we all know that there are various hiccups that can happen, including E-Verify if something is going wrong with their systems. So it's important to know that you should all have an HR contact where you can reach out for guidance and have questions if you do have questions about onboarding an F1 or J1 student, or even students or visitors on other visa statuses like J2. So feel free to reach out to our office if you also feel like we can be of help as well. So I'll hand it back to Maya to talk more about when students graduate.
Thanks so much, Carissa. Okay, so along our students' journey, they have finally, they've worked hard, they're ready to graduate, and they're now ready for their next step. So in general, students have several options after graduation, and those options are listed here. International students are eligible to apply for OPT, as Carissa mentioned. It's optional practical training, as well as academic training, or AT, for J1 students. Students can also transfer to a different program or even change their program or degree level within Rutgers. They may also have plans to change the current immigration status to a different visa category, or they can decide to return home or depart the US. Finally, we note too that students have what's called a grace period. So the grace periods are different for F and J1 students. For F1 students, the grace period is 60 days. For J1 students, the grace period is 30 days. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the Our Global portal and what students see when they log into this. I'm not sure if you were able to watch the video, the training videos that we provided ahead of time. If not, it's okay. But it's helpful to review as it takes you through the step-by-step process of how our system, which is known as the Our Global portal, communicates the students' information and requests through what we call e-forms, right? Electronic forms. And those allow us to update information into SEVIS. If you've never seen what the student sees, the student would access the Our Global portal using their net ID. They can then, once they're in the portal, complete a request, and the request could be to, reduce their course load, ask for an RCL, ask for a CPT, or maybe apply for an extension. All the student requests are accessed here in the portal by the student. This is not to be confused with many other portals that Rutgers has, all right? Only international students have access to the Our Global portal. And you know that Rutgers likes to keep things interesting. So there's always new processes and new softwares to learn, but this is a really big one for international students. So the bonus here is we're trying to keep everything paperless. We've had Synapsis since 2017, I think, which has been a great way to keep everything paperless for all international student processes from our office. So after the student makes their request and they complete the e-form for whatever action it is that they need, the student may or may not need your department to take action or approve your requests, their requests. Not all requests require departmental approval, but many of them do. But for example, a travel signature does not need your approval. But if a student is applying for CPT or they're applying to change their degree, then they definitely need the academic approver's input for that request. The academic official, which is usually the dean or the graduate program director, will be sent an email with a password and a link, and it's just automatic. They can click right on it there. And then once they go into the link, they are asked to sign on and complete the e-form request. So as you can see on the next slide, this is the departmental view of approving an e-form. That's what it looks like right there. So as you can see from this slide, there's a few questions that you would need to be prepared to complete and submit as the academic approver for an e-form. We sometimes have to remind the assigned approver to respond in case the approver wants to use the most recent email and link that was sent in the latest reminder. So we can send reminders that have a link that they can click on to go ahead and process their approval. Also, if you're approved to sign off on an academic request and your graduate program director or school is comfortable with you being the assigned approver, we can also make changes in the online system so that to the second approver to ensure that's the most appropriate contact. So we do try to keep our contact list up to date, but every now and then an academic department may have a change where someone is, on leave or someone else needs to step in and be the approver instead. Just reach out to our office and let us know so we can make that change on our end. Okay, and I believe it is about 10 o'clock, so we can stop here for some Q&A. I know we've had a lot of questions through the chat, which is great, but does anyone have any questions that they want to ask us now about anything that we've covered so far? Matt, I see you're unmuted. Go ahead.
I always have questions, Maya.
Please, go ahead.
So my first question is about students on dissertation. The reduced credit load talks about final semester and those things, but students on dissertation can take anywhere from 1 to, basically in our program, 1 to 12 dissertation credits per semester. But we don't want them to have to pay for 48 credits of dissertation when they only need 24 because they want to slow it down and go a certain number of credits per semester. So if an international student wants to do 3 or 6 credits of dissertation, but it's not their final semester and they are making what we consider academic progress, how do we negotiate, say, a 3-credit semester for an international student who's not in their final semester? Is that not okay?
That's a great question. Yes, it's okay. So the short answer is yes, it's okay. That's a really, really excellent question. So yeah, students these are probably the most common reduced credit load reasons that we see. There are less common RCL reasons like the medical one that I mentioned, or maybe in a student's first semester, they're having problems with English or something. Those are the ones we don't see very much. The RCL reasons that we see like 90–95% of the time are either students in their last semester and they don't have a full course load remaining, or it's a PhD student, or even a master's level thesis student who's done with their coursework and they're working on their thesis or they're working on their dissertation. And so those students might have multiple semesters of authorized RCL because they've done their coursework, they're just working on their document, whether it be a master's thesis or a PhD dissertation. And so we can definitely authorize them through the RCL. There is a reason that the academic official can select in the e-form to say, yes, the student is working on their dissertation and they need, they're approved for an RCL to be less than full-time for that semester and for several semesters.
And this one's a broad one that I think is, the other one I'll ask in the breakout room, but this one, when you talk about OPT after graduation, what kind of support does your office provide our alums from the time they graduate through that transition into, say, wanting to stay in the U.S. and they need to change their status and they need to apply for citizenship or whatever they're applying for to stay in the country? What kind of support does RU Global provide the alums for that first 6 to 12 months of transition?
That's a great question. So as far as, first of all, I guess talking about supporting the students from a regulatory reporting perspective, those students, once they graduate, if they go on OPT and they graduate, so once they're in OPT, they still fall under our caseloads because we have to report to the government where they're working, what they're doing for work, make sure that it is related to their degrees. So we are still very much connected with those students while they're on OPT. So they're still, OPT is a benefit of their F1 status. So they're still in their F1 status. They're still in our SEVIS designation. And so we still work with them throughout that time. We can definitely offer support through that time too. So, we have students in OPT who've been victims of a fraud scheme, for example, and they reach out to us and say, what do I do? And we can walk them through that process. Or a student has general questions about their legal status or about travel. we definitely are here to support them throughout that too. So right now we have probably about 900, I think 900-ish students who are on OPT. And so the caseloads of students that we support includes all the students who are no longer students of Rutgers, but they're still considered our students. And we can talk more again about, employment and OPT in a bit, but it's interesting to note that OPT is a 12-month benefit for all F1 students. But students who are in a STEM eligible degree, and again, we'll talk more about this in detail also, students in a STEM eligible degree are actually eligible for another 24 months on top of the 12 months of OPT. So a student could graduate from Rutgers and be an OPT for 3 years, and 3 years out from their graduation, they're still working with our office.
Awesome. Thank you both very much.
No problem. Good question.
I'd also like to mention, there's also life that happens during that time, right? So and I say that because, our office does stay with students once they're on OPT, but some of them get married, they want to bring their spouse here. So we do still have those requests coming in. Maybe they want to add a spouse, or maybe, when they change your address, all those things are still coming through our office so that we have to update their SEVIS record. So it's good to kind of hear, when we get to know the students and then we end up hearing that they're doing well and they're moving on. It's always good to hear that as well.
Definitely. Good note, Carissa. Other questions about anything that we talked about or anything we didn't talk about yet that somebody wants to know about?
Hi, this is Rhonda from the Rutgers School of Public Health. I have a question. So if we have a student who's accepted to our program and their status is at H4, are they required to contact your office for H?
For H, again, that's a really good question too. So for those of you who may not be aware, because I wasn't aware until I came into this field, there are multiple visa types, right, that Department of State allows. So literally A through Z, there are so many different visa types out there. Some of them are allowed to study full-time, and a lot of them are not allowed to study full-time. So the status that Rhonda is referring to is an H. I'm going to put it in the chat here, is H4. Okay, so H4, that will come across, Rutgers oftentimes because an H4 is a dependent of someone who's on an H1B. So it could be the spouse or the child of someone who has an H1B visa. H1B is an employment visa. So the H1B visa holder is a full-time employee of, a company that has sponsored them for the H1B. The H4 spouse or the H4 child of that person can enroll full-time. That's fine. So if your program, Rhonda, admits somebody who's on an H4 status, yes, they can enroll full-time, not a problem. You are not obligated to let us know, hey, I have the student who's on an H4, that you don't need to. But if the student approaches you and says, hey, I'm on H4, but I've heard about this F1 status, I want to know more about it, I want to know if I should change to F1, then absolutely direct that student to our office and we'll have a conversation with them. Because while H4 does have the full-time enrollment as a benefit that they can enroll full-time in a program, there's also F1 benefits that an H4 doesn't have. So for example, under F1, a student can do CPT, curricular practical training, or they can do OPT. Those are benefits that are not there for an H4. So we will very oftentimes have students, undergraduate students, graduate students, who come to us and they're on an H4 and they're already in the program, or they've been admitted to a program and they say, hey, I'm on an H4, but I want to change to an F1. How do I do that? So our advisors will work with them and they walk them through the different options they have to change their status. They can either change their status through traveling, going to their home country, and coming back in with an I-20, and they can change to F1 that way, or they can remain here in the US and they can file for a change of status with USCIS. It's a lengthy process. It costs money. They may work with an attorney on that. So a lot of them do select that option to file for change of status in the US, but also a lot of them will leave the US and then come back in to change from an H4 to an F1. That was a really long answer to your question, Rhonda, but I hope
Yes,
that.
but it answers the question because the person is coming in just to do like a certificate and it's a dependent. However, at the end of this 2 semesters, it could possibly lead to an F1. So that's something I'm looking at down the line, once he or she finishes the short term. And then just on a side for B1, a visitor, I know visitors, I don't know whether they can shop programs or not, but if they wanted to take like a short course or hear something, then decide they want to enroll, and then they apply and accept it, then I know they're going to have to get an F1 visa. Is that correct?
That's very correct. And that's a great point. B1 and B2 visas are for visitors. Those are tourist visas. Those are, business and tourism pleasure visas. So they're not for studying. So if they choose to take like an incidental course, like auditing a course or something like that, B1, B2 can maybe do that, but they certainly cannot enroll in a full-time program and stay on B1, B2. They would absolutely have to change to F1 status. And that would be traveling or entering. Yeah, thank you. And then Jasenia had a question too about H4 be part-time study or part-time employment. I do believe H4 can be part-time study. Krista, correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think the H4 is either full-time or part-time. And as far as employment goes, they would still need what's called an EAD card, an employment authorization document. And that's something that they apply for through USCIS. So an EAD card is the same thing that an F1 student gets when they do OPT. They file with the USCIS, they get this employment authorization document, they can use it to work. It's the same as an H4 visa holder. An H4 visa holder can work part-time or full-time, but they have to go through USCIS and file for that EAD card.
I will say that, so a lot of our H4 students, assuming they're undergrads, they're going to age out. What that means that at the age of 21, they can no longer be an H4. So they have to either change their status to, more often than not, an F1 visa, which means they'd have to be full-time, or they would be maybe pending green card holder or something like that. Many times, depending on where they are in their application status, as Maya mentioned, we often see that they don't have the ability to work, the work permit. So they do end up wanting to change to F1, partly because they then would have the ability to work, but also because they're aging out. So at the age of 21, they should not be H4 anymore. So
if the person who's going to join our program, if she's aged out, at that point she's going to have to request an F1, is what you're saying, pretty much?
yes, right?
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I'm saying, I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's okay, because I was going on just the basic principle, just being a H4 dependent. But now I'm going to have to go look at her age and I
think that's a good question. I think this is not your responsibility.
Okay.
It's them. I mean, we're not immigration attorneys, and neither are you. So
right.
I think what you want to do is that, and I wanted to mention also with H4, we do have a lot of students that participate in orientation sometimes, or they're maybe orientation leaders themselves. So if you find that there is an international student on campus that might need additional guidance, you can always pass them our way so we can connect them with other people who might help. But we don't actually advise them on their immigration status unless they're going from F1 or J1. So then we would come into play and we would, make an appointment with them for their change of status and so forth. But it's important that you can guide them and direct them, but you don't want to be providing them, additional advice. And there's also a limit in which what we provide them. Many times, as Maya said, they do seek out the advice of an attorney, and they get that that I-20 from us and then file separately with an attorney or on their own. So I would just be careful. You don't want to get into the point where you're advising
I
too
see.
much, but you're
Okay.
directing them. Yeah.
Thank you.
These are all great questions. As you can see, there's a lot with international students that we can't even cover in the hour plus that Chris and I went over. So it's great to hear about the other issues that people see in your everyday work and that you might want to know about, such as H4 students and changes of status and things like that. Any other questions? Because we have a little bit of time before we're joined by Mark Kaichis. He's coming at 10:20, I believe. But we still have a little bit of time if anyone else has any other questions. Employment, enrollment, COVID-related changes, anything?
I know we've had a lot of students with financial difficulties. That's been a big topic throughout COVID. So I'm sure many of you have heard of students either looking for jobs or funding. That's unfortunately a topic that we've seen, which is a reality of students. And we do have something called an emergency grant that students can apply for. It's not very well advertised, but it is something where students can submit an application, and if they do meet some criteria for the application, we can review it and possibly see if we can assist them with their tuition only. It's not just a scholarship. So that is something that we might, just so you know. We have another question. How do the visa appointments work? Oops. How do the visa appointments work? Several students said they don't know if they will get their appointment on time and be present for the start of a semester. That's a good question. So as soon as the students receive their documents, either I-20 or DS-2019, they can apply for a visa. Typically, it's in their home country, and they use that SEVIS number to schedule their appointments. I do know that depending on where they're looking to apply, it can be very challenging right now to get an appointment. I know Madrid typically is, there's no typical because of COVID, but I would say, in Europe has sometimes a general faster turnaround time than say Asia. And right now, I think there's definitely some delays. I will also say that some students might actually need to get visa appointments outside their country. So for example, students in Iran, from Iran are not able to schedule an appointment in the US consulate because one does not exist in Iran. So they actually have to go to a third country to apply for the visa and either wait for their passport there or it gets mailed to them. So it can definitely be complicated. In terms of your question, they should hopefully arrive within 30 days. That is the federal requirement. They can always let us know if they're going to be delayed. Sometimes we can, the department can write a letter if it's a graduate student, supporting them to say that, for example, if they have a TA or GA, it's not always the case, but sometimes these letters can help. I hope that helps answer your question, Jacinia.
Hi, yes and no, because I work with the School of Engineering and we have a lot, so the undergrad curriculum is pretty intense and the courses are so big that it's kind of hard to accommodate like individual student needs. So typically the professor will be like, well, they've already missed like 2 weeks, 3 weeks. No, there's no online version. I'm not going to make like an online version for 1 or 2 students. So I feel like for us, it's always like, well, then they should just wait to start in the spring. But does that?
Right. You probably go by the add drop date or something, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So does that complicate their visa, like their documents, if we tell them to wait 3 months? Like, can they postpone or do they have to go through the whole process again?
Your School of Engineering, I think, Maya, do you know? I think it's based on, I think SAS, they cannot defer to the spring. We have to wait the whole year. I don't know with School of Engineering. Admission wise, I think it's physically possible to delay their I-20 and defer their I-20. From the Rutgers standpoint, I don't know whether if you tell us you would accept them in the spring, then we can change their document. That's the long story of it. But it depends on, Rutgers, right?
Yeah, and I think it may be more of an admissions call too, as far as which schools can be allowed to just defer students one semester, and as opposed to which students may need to apply all over again for the following year. But yeah, certainly if a student has a visa delay or some other sort of travel delay and they can't arrive within the first couple of weeks, we would not advise them to come late. We never want students to miss. It was different, like within the last couple of years, if students were taking all online classes or mostly online classes, they could kind of keep up during those first couple of weeks. But now that things are getting more and more in person, we wouldn't want to put students at a disadvantage by saying, oh, sure, come 3 weeks into the semester and you're going to be okay, because we all know that they're going to be at a disadvantage at that point. So these are all great questions. And I think actually it's now about time to welcome our guest speaker, who's going to wrap up the first part of this workshop with us. So let me share my screen while I'm going to have Mark Kaichis unmute himself and introduce himself, and I'll get his slides all set up. So Mark, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, everybody. Mark Kaichis. I'm the director of the Graduate English Language Learners Program, which is part of the Rutgers English Language Institute. So I wanted to introduce some of our programming, which I think would be very useful for international multilingual graduate students, as well as for students who speak English as a first language. We don't focus on necessarily one group of graduate students with the understanding that writing and communicating at the graduate level is really a foreign language for many folks. So we really support all graduate students. That is our focus. So I'm just going to talk briefly just about our program offerings, and if there are any students who have questions, I'm happy to answer the questions about courses this fall. Next slide, please. So RELI is an English for academic and professional purposes program, and I always like to underline that RELI is not an ESL program. It is not in any way a remedial language-focused program. We focus on improving academic and professional writing and communication skills. So we like to think that we support graduate students from matriculation to graduation. So from the first day that students step on campus as master's students, perhaps, dealing with U.S. academic culture, trying to keep up with their tasks, such as the amount of reading that they get, in the first semester, all the way up to helping students polish their dissertations and prepare for interviews, academic or professional interviews. So we really support all graduate students. That is our remit. And with a special focus on international multilingual graduate students. All of our faculty have extensive experience as language consultants, as writing consultants. And so our faculty really prefer to work one-on-one and with small groups with students in their courses. And so we try to keep our courses small and make it really useful for and flexible for the busy graduate student. Next slide, please. So this picture is from our semesterly event, the Graduate Research Symposium, which we'll be having on May 3rd this semester in the Alexander Library, and I'll be sharing some more information about that at the end. But we have a lot of co-curricular events in addition to courses which are available for students at any level of their graduate study. As I was mentioning earlier, we have an emphasis on multilingual international graduate students, but we also support many students who speak English as a first language, particularly like non-traditional graduate students who may have been out of the university environment for 20, 30 years. We have many of those students as well in our courses. So we really try to support everybody and help them be successful in their graduate studies. At the bottom, I have a link to our website as well as a link to our schedule of classes for fall 2022. That's right. Next slide. Just to kind of give you a few kind of talking points about our courses. If you support graduate students in your program, or you talk to graduate students who want additional support, I always like to underline that our courses are free for students. They're offered in fall and spring, and they're 0 and e-credit courses. They don't take anything away from the students' current responsibilities, but we like to remove burdens from students' workload. So we really try to work with students' current writing and communication assignments, giving them support on those assignments. As I mentioned, we have our courses facilitated by RELI language consultants and focus on small group workshops and one-on-one consultations. And the courses are repeatable for additional support as well. So many times the student will, start working with an instructor in a one-on-one capacity to get their support, maybe in the first semester, and then they'll continue with that person in the following semester. So that's all perfectly fine. We try to, really make it nice and open and flexible for students to enter our program. Next slide. I just want to make sure that students understand the differences between our programs or our courses, I mean. So if the student is a first year graduate student, either a master's or PhD student, then really the appropriate course would be graduate academic communication, which blends, various skills, writing and communication that a new graduate student would need, in addition to how to grapple with U.S. academic culture and expectations. So that's really the best course for the student who is new to campus. As the student's making a transition from the coursework to maybe more research writing, they may be starting to prepare their maybe their dissertation proposal, or start to do conference work. Research writing and presentation is going to be the appropriate course for them. So that's like year 2, 3 for the average graduate student. And then finally, professional writing in the job market. It's really appropriate for students who are finishing up their graduate studies and want to sort of take a look and understand writing for diverse audiences, particularly in professional and corporate sector, as well as the academic sector. We do work with preparing students for the job market as well. We do, like a lot of job talk preparation, as well as how to write statements. So we try to make that course very useful for students who are going to be on the market within a year or two. And then finally, our writing and communication groups. These are, while they're called groups and studios, it's really the emphasis is on one-on-one graduate tutoring. So all students who enter these groups, they get about, I would say, available to them about as much as 7 or 8 one-on-one tutoring sessions available with an instructor throughout the semester. And those times are made in conjunction with the teacher. So they have a lot of one-on-one support, whether it's on writing or preparing their oral communication tasks. And they also have opportunity to work with other students across the disciplines, particularly to get peer review and feedback on regular work. So if you have students who are working on particular projects, whether it's a dissertation or they're trying to maybe complete an article or complete a grant application, Graduate Writing Studio would probably be the best course for them, because they get that regular feedback from the instructor as well as other students in the course on that project. All of these courses, they have no extra assignments. Instead of assignments, teachers introduce particular small-scale tasks which students can complete in the course session, and they get a lot of one-on-one feedback on their current work in their classes. So to find our courses, you just go under English as a Second Language on the schedule of classes. I don't like the name, by the way, English as a Second Language. I think it's a little reductive, but it's been a long time trying to change that, and hopefully we'll do that in the near future. Next slide. Just some additional information, just a little more specific about what happens in our courses. All of our courses begin with a conversation with the instructor and the student, defining their goals and creating their learning plan for the semester. So that's a really important part of all of our courses. And then teachers design and in some cases redesign their plans according to the students in the room. So we're very used to working with students across the disciplines. Our courses are capped at 12 students, and sometimes we'll have 12 different disciplines represented in a single class. So our teachers are very proficient working across the disciplines and choosing tasks that are appropriate for the students in the room. And of course, they're always willing and adaptable to shift gears if students' professional lives, personal lives, or academic lives get in the way, as they often do. Teachers can, easily move the classes online. Our courses are all hybrid, so we can. Well, first off, most of our classes are actually still fully online. So, so that is useful for the busy graduate student as well to sort of fit this sort of support within their schedule. Next slide. Just some additional benefits for graduate students. Our courses don't just focus on writing and communication, just understood narrowly. We focus on time management strategies, how to network at conferences, seminars, symposia within your department. But students can also work on developing articles for publication, course papers, etc. So it's a really low pressure environment, a space to get that support from the teacher and meet students from different disciplines. Because as we know, as former graduate students, it's really difficult to meet people from across the disciplines and learn about work that's going on and communicate one's research to different disciplines. So that is one real benefit of these courses. Next slide. Okay, I just wanted to conclude with just talking up a couple of our upcoming events sponsored by RELI. The first one is a professional development workshop focused on faculty primarily, but graduate students are also welcome to attend. It's on the subject of corpus linguistics, which is essentially real world language that is used to create particular textbooks to teach students English language skills, but it's very real life, real world tasks. So this workshop is going to talk about how to use corpus linguistics to support the writing of graduate students. So our presenter is very knowledgeable and skilled about this topic, and she's done some research on this. So this is going to be useful for faculty as well as students who want to use computerized databases, which have sort of, big repositories of real world English to use for their own professional writing development. So that's coming up April 15th in Murray Hall and College Avenue campus. Next slide. And then the final event is the Graduate Research Symposium, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a semesterly event for graduate students who want to get early presentation experience. Students can deliver a 10-minute panel presentation to focus on delivering kind of current research that they're working on in their lab, maybe, or something that they're preparing for their thesis or dissertation. And it's a very welcoming space where people get that practice to present their research as well as network and meet various people in different disciplines. And I'm really excited that this semester it's going to be back in person after a while before we've had an in-person event. So it's going to be in Alexander Library. From 12 to 5, there's a lot of different sessions. I would say about 20 graduate student sessions during the afternoon of that Friday. And there's also be a keynote and food and drink as well. So that's it.
Mark, thank you so much. It's really great to hear about all the different offerings that you have in your program. And certainly we like to refer our students when needed. And it's great for all of our partners and academic units who are here today to know about them as well. So thank you so much for providing all that information and for taking the time today. So here's a slide for more information to get in touch with Mark or his team about about RELI or about other programs that they have, all that information is on the slide right here. Great.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And again, this presentation will be shared with everybody afterwards. We'll send it out as a PDF and an email so people can refer back to the slides and all the contact information. So thank you again, Mark. Okay, at this point, we are ready to have a little stretch for about 10 minutes. We'll come back at 10:40. So we have just under 10 minutes to take a little break. Feel free to step away from your computers for a little while, give your eyes a break from the screens. And we look forward to coming back at about 10:40 when we'll be joined with the advisors from our office for some updates and breakout rooms. See you all in a little bit. For those of you who registered only for the second half of the workshop, welcome. We're really glad you joined us. My name is Maya Sarno. I'm Associate Director for Student Support at Rutgers Global International Student Services. I'm joined by Carissa McCarthy, one of our Senior International Student Advisors. And in the second half of the workshop, we're also going to meet the rest of our International Student Advising team. So they will join us for introductions in a little while. And then we're going to split up into breakout rooms for some case studies involving international students and dive a little bit deeper into the issues that we discussed in the first half. We're also going to then regroup for reporting out any maybe aha moments that people may have had in the case study discussions. And then we'll have a second set of breakout rooms to talk about specific topics. And we'll have time for you all to ask remaining questions in Q&A before we wrap up as well. So to get us started, I'm going to take just a few minutes to go over the current immigration landscape as it pertains to international students. So for a bit of context, let's first go over some relevant points in the current government guidance, especially as it relates to online courses. So prior to the pandemic, federal regulations limited international students to only one online course, or that is 3 credits per semester. Recognizing that with the pandemic, numerous students relocated to other states across the country, and many of them also returned home to their home countries at the onset of the pandemic, the government did make temporary accommodations to the rule about online coursework so that continuing students could maintain their legal status even while enrolled in a fully online course load. This accommodation, however, does not apply to new students who are still required to enroll in at least one in-person course or have an in-person requirement in order to study in the US. So therefore, based on current guidance from the government, new students who intended to pursue a 100% online course of study were still advised not to come to the US. These students had the option to begin their programs from home, and the start dates on their immigration documents, their I-20s or DS-2019s, were deferred to the semester in which they planned to arrive for in-person classes. As in-person offerings have now increased and they continue to ramp up for the fall, more and more international students are entering the US to enroll for an in-person or hybrid schedule. For students who are unable to enter the US up to this point, we appreciate that academic units have made accommodations for online coursework wherever feasible. So we very much appreciate your help with that. Similarly, for graduate students who wanted to enter the US, but may have had a course schedule that's 100% online, many departments were able to establish in-person components to their programs so that the students could enter the US with an in-person academic requirement. Otherwise, for students who started their programs from abroad and who wanted to come to campus for the spring semester, for example, our partners in the admissions offices were closely involved with updating the I-20s and DS-2019 documents for these students so that they were able to apply for a visa and attempt entry to the US. Continuing students were not subject to any online study restriction, and they could re-enter the US as long as they had valid visas and a valid I-20 or DS-2019 document. Throughout the pandemic, there have been several travel restrictions to consider coming into the US and traveling in or through other countries as well. In last November, there was a presidential proclamation that removed any geographic restrictions for international travel in or out of the US. Instead, it put COVID vaccination requirements in place for international students entering the US. Visa issuance, let's remember, falls under the purview of Department of State. So even though visa services have resumed in many locations, the options are still limited in certain parts of the world. And some of our students are still encountering delays with their visa appointments. So a few more regulatory updates also include the expected expiration of the temporary accommodations. So as I just mentioned, there's temporary accommodations that the government put in place for the pandemic. This current guidance from the Student and Exchange Visitor Program is due to expire on June 30. So we're getting ready to receive updates from the government and communicate to students about the regulatory changes. We anticipate that we may see a return to pre-pandemic guidance, but again, we anticipate things and then we never know what the government will give us until they issue the guidance. So we'll see what happens. But in any event, any change to the guidance would affect the number of online courses that students may take. And also it could affect where they reside during their programs and even where they engage in off-campus employment. So with any of these changes, we will keep students informed about the changes to regulatory guidance, and we'll be sure to post any updates on the alerts page. Just as an aside, many of you might be thinking, well, what about registration for fall? How can they register for fall courses if they don't know how many online courses they'll be able to take? We are reaching out specifically to students who are currently enrolled in more than one online course and giving them a heads up that they should plan accordingly, just in case the guidance does change and restrict them to only taking one online course starting in the fall. Back to COVID. So COVID continues to be an issue across the globe, as we all know. And with international students, it's most noticeable for those who are trying to travel to China and maybe who cannot easily find flights. This came into play a lot with students who were authorized for a leave of absence, and they had a hard time going back home and departing the US. So we worked with these students on a case-by-case basis, very carefully and closely, working with any students for whom this is an issue. Some news about STEM programs. So I referred to STEM programs earlier and about the 24-month STEM extension. The Department of Homeland Security recently posted an updated list of STEM eligible CIP codes. So this list impacts whether or not students from particular programs are eligible to apply for the 24-month STEM OPT extension upon completion of their OPT. ISSS determined that none of our current international students are enrolled in programs that are affected by this update. But at the same time, we're also actively working with institutional research to determine which academic programs could potentially be mapped to these newly added CIP codes that are STEM eligible. So for more on the STEM eligible list, you can click on the link that we're going to pop into the chat. Actually, Carissa did pop into the chat. So thank you, Carissa, for that list. Also, as you can imagine, our office has recently been fielding many questions from campus partners, as well as from students about support for students from Afghanistan and Ukraine and Russia during this time. So we continue to extend our support for all international students, but especially for those who are from troubled regions and who are going through a current conflict. So Rutgers Global as a whole, just so you're aware, is actively looking for ways to also support potential refugees as well as incoming students from those countries. Otherwise, we continue to be a personalized advising resource for all international students, and we're happy to be a resource also for our campus partners. Please know always that with these different updates happening, you can always refer to our alerts page for more on any of the updates that we shared, as well as whatever updates are coming down the pike. And you can also refer to our page of email notices. We do send out monthly notices to our students, and we'll put that link also in the chat. Thank you very much for Carissa, right on time. And so I'm going to hand it off to Carissa just for a moment to talk about the continued impact of the pandemic on our international students.
Thank you, Maya. So as you all can imagine, we've been working through this pandemic along with our students, and the pandemic effects are still felt on an everyday basis from our students. So some of the recent challenges this semester, I mentioned it earlier, but I'll go through a little more details now, has been having them meet the vaccine requirement, registering for classes, both in person and online where needed, and also while working off paying their tuition bills, which as I said earlier, this has been a concern for many of our students. and many of them have balances from prior semesters. So it's been tough. In addition to our student interns and sponsored students, which are a more specialized group, which I work with, they're trying to find housing and be close to campus and have those resources as well. So we've been working with other departments like health services, One Stop, the registrar's office, housing, student accounting, and other offices to make sure students are both compliant on all fronts, have access to resources, in addition to supporting their mental health and overall well-being, which is also very important for them to succeed. And again, we remain grateful for all your collaborations and support through the many campus partners that we work with to support our students. So thank you again. Now it's time for our breakout rooms. I'm just going to introduce the breakout rooms a little bit, and then we will go into meeting with our other staff. So that's here. So in the breakout rooms, we're going to discuss some real life scenarios so we can kind of really get into details on what you all would do in these types of real life scenarios. And I think everyone's here from our staff. So before we get and break out, we are going to talk to some of our staff members and ISAs and front office and support staff. So who do we have first? I'm going to popcorn, right? So I'm seeing Steph first, so I will popcorn to you.
Thank you, Carissa. So I'm Steph Acuna, International Student Advisor, and I primarily work with undergrads in SAS, and I have a handful of grad programs that I also am the liaison for, and excited to talk to you all in these breakout rooms. And I am going to popcorn to Leellen.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here. My name is Leellen Johnson. I am an International Student Advisor. I primarily am a liaison for graduate students in the areas. There's a ton, but I'll just say as much as I can: biochemistry, microbiology, molecular genetics, cell and developmental bio, pharmaceutical science, biomedical, bioresource engineering, ECE, packaging engineering, industrial and systems engineering, HRM, industrial relations and HR, operation research, and then the statistics department, which is stats and biostatistics, data science, and financial and risk management. So, it's a lot of stuff, but any of you from those departments ever need anything, I'm your person. Thank you and welcome again. And I'm going to popcorn it over to Jacqueline.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jacqueline. I'm an international student advisor here. I work with SAS, juniors and seniors, all the language departments, GSE, anthropology, art history, and food science. Yeah, let's see. I'm going to popcorn to Junling.
Hi, good morning. My name is Junling. I am one of the senior international student advisor at ISSS. I work with many professional schools, graduate schools, including Sky, Blaustein, Gazap, and also other graduate programs that are STEM and non-STEM. So nice to meet you all here today. And I'm gonna popcorn it to Susan.
Susan, I think you're muted.
Okay, a little technical issue. Hi, I'm Susan Maldonado. I am the SEVIS compliance coordinator, and I work with all the students maintaining their SEVIS record, maintaining their record in our database and in the Rutgers Student Records database. Basically, that's what I do. And I will throw it over to Megan.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Cody. I'm one of the ISAs. I have a hodgepodge of departments that I work with, mainly computer science, some engineering, I think all Mason Gross programs, PharmD, a few others as well. So hi, everyone. And I think the last person is Lamar.
Hey everyone, my name is Lamar. I'm the coordinator here in the office, and while I don't work one-on-one with any departments, I offer sort of a general advising, one-stop shop sort of advising to our students. I also am and have been a Rutgers student for a while, so if you have students who have questions about generally navigating Rutgers, in addition to navigating as an international student, then I can be of support to them.
Great. Thank you, Lamar. I think we got everything. Trevor, I just wanted to mention a couple people that are not here, including Trevor, who's our associate systems, I'm forgetting the title, analyst. Sorry, he even makes fun of himself with the title. So, but he's key in terms of helping us with Synapsis and works very close with Susan. We also have Carol Long and Caroline Foga. And both of them are very crucial as part of our office. They are the front desk coordinators, and they also help advise a lot of our students. So they're probably busy answering phone calls right now. So they also give their best wishes to all of you. And I think before we jump to the breakout rooms, we're going to just talk about some quick best practices, I believe, right? Or am I? No, I'm sorry. We're gonna jump to breakout room. Sorry. Do we need to? Okay, we're gonna divide and conquer now. Sorry, everyone.
That's okay. We'll hold the best practices until after the breakout rooms, because some of the breakout rooms best practices may come up there. So we'll do the breakout rooms for about 25 minutes. I'll give everyone in the breakout rooms a time check when we've got 1 minute left. Maybe reach out to the advisors when we've got about 5 minutes left. But we'll take about 25 minutes for the first set of breakout rooms before we come back and regroup for best practices.
Yeah, and we have about 5 scenarios we can go through. Anyone who gets more into them, you'll get a prize. You'll get a thumbs up. So this sounds good. So what do we do?
Okay. So
Maya's going to put us in the breakout rooms?
Yeah, I'm opening up the rooms right now. Everyone, I think, is getting invited to join the breakout rooms. And I'll move the advisors around to make sure there's one advisor per room.
Like obviously one answer, but kind of complicated in the next. So hopefully at the same time, hopefully you get some good feedback and some good discussions. If you have any thoughts on those, then please put them in our evaluation so we can change them and modify them. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some best practices. And again, feel free to share this in our second breakout room if you have any thoughts on this. But this is just kind of a quick summary for some points and changes that we've made in our office the last couple years. And we've adjusted some of our workspaces to accommodate, for example, for COVID and other needs. We've thought about whether our office can be more accessible to some students based on their ability and their needs. So we have an example of this is now we have a location on our ground floor where we're able to meet with our students. We've also added closed captioning to our workshops, which is another benefit to students who might have different abilities and other challenges, that they need some extra support and some with comprehension or even basic language needs. I think that's important. Also, communication is important. As we can all be extra particular on being aware that we are in a virtual environment. So recognizing some students that can come from different backgrounds and just confirming that your language is important, I think, when you're communicating with anyone. So whether it's over the phone or in an email, you want to, number one, know that there should be empathy throughout, because students, when you're getting an email from a student, they may not be interpreting it the way you are interpreting it. So it's important to note that and try to use a variety of language and media that might help relay your message a little better. We found that that's helpful. And don't forget that I said this in my breakout room, but Rutgers lives in acronyms. So don't forget that we constantly use acronyms and idioms and phrases that are not widely known to our international students. So it's important that you kind of explain a little more in terms of what you might be saying and what that means. We use, OPT, CPT, all of these things, and we do talk about it, but there's a lot of things that we use a lot of times that we all don't realize, and that takes some adjustment from the students. So there's any best practices that you all want to share, we'd love to hear them. I think we probably have a few minutes, right, Maya? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I was looking for my mute.
What's that? Sorry.
I said, sorry, I was looking for my unmute. But yeah, if anyone has any quick questions or best practices that they want to share with everyone before we do the second breakout rooms, please feel free to unmute yourselves and share. And if not, we could go right to the second set of breakout rooms.
Okay, maybe people are thinking.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay, so Carissa, did you want to explain how the second set of breakout rooms is going to work? And I'll put the link in the chat.
Sure. So we have our advisors here that are going to assist in the breakout rooms, and we have specific topics. So now we're going to have a chance to talk about those specific topics that are in our breakout sessions, and we'll have about 25 minutes. And you can choose whichever room is best for the topic you want to discuss. You can also switch rooms. You can, go in and out, whatever you might need to. If you don't have any questions and would like to leave, you can also do that, but we prefer you kind of stay because we have a couple more things to tie up everything at the end. And so if you have any questions on those specific breakout rooms. So we have travel, mental health, updates to I-20s or DS 2019s, which include change of program and so forth, off-campus employment, but it's specific for CPT, on-campus employment and onboarding, and synapsis and our global questions, and then postgraduate employment, which would include STEM and OPT.
So the rooms are set for 25 minutes, and there should be a 1 minute warning before they automatically close. But I'm going to go ahead and open up the rooms now. I will remain in the main rooms if anyone wants to speak to me directly, or if you leave a room and you're not sure where else to go, feel free to come back into the main room and I can help direct traffic. So, and thank you, advisors, for going to your rooms.
It was just good. It's good to talk to Jingling. I'm doing more extension forms than I've ever done. So it's good to know. Good to know. So it's, Jingling goes, "Oh, I recognize your name." I said, "Yeah, you've had a lot of emails from me."
Yeah.
So, but it's just no, you guys are great. You guys are really good. You've always been helpful. So I appreciate that.
Thanks, Debbie. Well, we appreciate your collaboration, truly. So I think we all know your name in some way. So it's great.
Exactly.
It's great to be working with you. That's not a
Same here. Same here.
That's
As I said, I don't mess with like visas and stuff like that. You don't want anything wrong.
No, it's okay. And you don't need to mess with the visas. That's okay. The whole point of today is talking about what you need to know.
Thank you.
So no problem.
Thanks. Like I said, thank you for all your help. I appreciate it.
Of course, of course. Okay, well, I think now that we are all back, Carissa, did you want to say something?
No, I was gonna I was curious if a lot of the departments, the graduate departments, knew about ELL and MARC services. I was just curious if anyone had known about that. I mean, hopefully you all know, but he is a great resource. So it's great. We've had students, reach out to them and feel definitely more supported in terms of their language, and they need that sometimes as graduate students. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I do hope too that, when we share out the slides later on, that people can go back into Mark's slides specifically and maybe grab some information there that they can share out with any students. Because sometimes students don't come to us to say that they need support from a language, area, but they might go to their academic departments to mention that. So It's good to know.
Yeah, and if you share the information, it's different than them searching themselves, because they'll probably say, "Oh, I'll get to that. I'll get to that." But it's nice when you recommend it to them; they might feel a little more inclined to look into it. That's true.
Exactly. So welcome back, everybody, from the second and last set of breakout rooms. We are just about to wrap up. I really hope that you found both sets of breakout rooms helpful. I want to give a quick shout out to our advising staff who were there for the breakout rooms. So thank you all for being always so knowledgeable and so helpful and such good communicators, not just to the students, but to our campus partners. So we really appreciate your time, advisors, for being with us and for participating in the breakout rooms today. And we just thank everybody who's still here for staying with us throughout the morning. We know that we went over a lot of information, and we hope that you have an improved understanding about international students. Not that you need to be the visa or immigration experts, but that at least you have a better understanding about their unique needs and considerations and responsibilities when it comes to compliance. We all play a part in supporting our students throughout their journey at Rutgers. And it's a great opportunity today for us to connect and to learn more about each other's roles. Hopefully you all had some great discussions in talking about how we support students together in the international student experience. So we encourage you to reach out to us anytime if you have any questions or concerns about working with international students, or direct students to our office. If you have students who come to you with questions, again, they can reach us by email. We have our general email, I'll put in the chat right now, is isss-students@global.rutgers.edu. And otherwise, the contact information for Rutgers Global is here on this slide. And maybe we can also pop into the chat the contact details for the main office at 180 College Ave, as well as the office at RBHS in Newark. In the meantime, thank you all for joining today. We really appreciate all your help